There are places in the Appalachian Mountains you won't find on any map, and for good reason. Hidden roads that were paved before there were towns, cabins that don't appear in any county records, and trails that only locals whisper about when they've had enough to drink. Some say those woods keep what they take. Others say the mountains themselves decide who comes back down. Every hiker, ranger, and wanderer who vanished up there left behind more than footprints. They left questions, unanswered for decades. 8 of those stories have resurfaced, each one told in fragments: radio calls, journals, found tapes, and witness statements. What ties them together isn't proof. It's something quieter, something heard in the pauses, in the way a man's voice changes when he realizes he isn't alone. Tonight, we open the files that were never meant to be heard. 8 new true stories from the Appalachian Mountains. Stories too disturbing to tell. Until now. This is Dark Room of Whispers. The Appalachian Mountains stretch for more than 2,000 miles, from the edge of Alabama to the far corners of Maine. But the stories we're about to tell come from the ridge country, where the fog hangs low and never seems to lift completely. Up there, the air is colder. It clings to your clothes and dulls every sound. Even birds avoid certain valleys. The locals say they always have. Old coal towns are swallowed by forest now. Entire streets overgrown, foundations hidden under moss. You can walk for hours and still hear the faint rattle of tin from roofs that shouldn't still be standing. At night, the wind carries voices that don't travel in straight lines. A whisper that begins on one side of the ridge can end up beside you, clear as speech. It's hard to tell what's echo and what isn't. Some places up here don't want to be found. Locals talk about them with a kind of careful distance. Not fear exactly, but respect. They say there are paths that shift after dark, trails that lead back to where you started, no matter how far you've gone. That's where the first story begins. Mile 87, an unmarked section of the Appalachian Trail, deep inside Greenbrier County. Only one ranger still remembers what happened there, and even he refuses to talk about it after sundown. He called it the vanishing at Mile 87. Mile 87 wasn't on any official map. Only a handful of rangers had ever walked it in winter. That's where a lone hiker disappeared in early November, nearly 30 years ago. He called in a report that began like any other, the usual trail check. But then his voice grew quieter on the radio, words breaking, static creeping between syllables. He mentioned seeing a figure at the edge of the tree line. No movement, no sound, just a presence, watching. He laughed nervously at first, thinking it might be another hiker. But the laughter died in his throat when he realized the figure hadn't moved an inch in the 10 minutes he had watched. He tried to describe it. A shadow stretched tall, but no features, no color, just wrong. Something about the way it held itself, perfectly still, felt impossible. Then he heard the dragging, not like sticks on dirt, heavier, deliberate, as if the forest itself had weight. He moved cautiously, flashlight scanning the trees. Nothing, only the dragging, circling, following him even as he doubled back. He called for backup. Static silence. Then a final, shaky transmission. It knows my name. After that, nothing. The search began immediately. The ranger who would later report the events described footprints. Human, small, fading mid-trail, as if someone had simply vanished. Campfires he passed along the trail were still warm, but empty. No sign of the hiker. Even the dogs trained to track scents refused to continue. Weeks later, the hiker's personal journal was found in a hollow tree. Entries stopped mid-sentence. The final words scratched repeatedly. "It's standing closer. I swear it's wearing my jacket." The photographs he carried showed only empty trail, snow-dusted trees, nothing else. But when analyzed frame by frame, a shadow appears in the tree line, elongated, motionless, just beyond the edge of vision. Something, present, observing every move, yet never fully revealing itself. The ranger returned years later for closure. At sunset, he stood at mile 87 and swore he saw a figure, again, motionless at the tree line. No face, no movement, only a presence that waited. He never spoke of it to anyone outside the department again. Locals learned to avoid that section after dark. Hikers who insist on passing it report hearing whispers, faint voices calling their names. Even now, those who trek the ridge say the wind carries more than cold air. Some hear footsteps that follow them back, fading only when they stop moving. Mile 87 is a reminder. Some places remember, some places wait. Would you walk that trail alone at night? Story 2. The cabin that waited. Not every cabin has a key. Not every path leads where the map says it does. In 2011, a couple rented a cabin through an obscure hiking forum, a listing that never existed in any records. What they found inside would leave them questioning whether some doors should never be opened. The cabin sat deep in the valley, surrounded by thick pine trees and fog that never seemed to lift. The air was damp, carrying the smell of mildew and decaying wood. Inside, the firewood was stacked neatly, though untouched for decades. The windows were grimy, letting in thin strips of gray light, and every creak of the floor sounded louder than it should. Outside, the forest seemed quiet, almost too quiet. Even the nearby stream felt muted, its water flowing without the usual chirping of frogs or rustle of leaves. It was a place that felt paused, waiting. The first night, the couple noticed objects moving slightly. Chairs shifted positions. Doors that had been closed were ajar. At first, they blamed the wind or the uneven cabin floor. Then came the knocks. 3 in a row, precise, deliberate, coming from the floor above, though the cabin had only one level. The couple called out. Silence. No footsteps returned. Later, they heard soft dragging sounds outside, circling the cabin. When they looked through the window, nothing was there. No footprints, no animals, nothing that could explain it. By the second night, the disturbances had intensified. Objects moved while they watched. The temperature shifted suddenly from warm to freezing. A soft whisper sometimes floated through the rooms, syllables they couldn't understand, yet felt familiar. On the third night, the couple discovered the trail camera they had left outside, set to capture wildlife. When they reviewed it, their blood ran cold. In one frame, a figure was lying in bed beside them, completely still, face hidden in shadows. They had felt no presence in the room, no movement. Yet the camera caught someone, or something, there. They ran to show each other, only to realize the figure had disappeared. Every window, every corner, empty. No footprints in the snow, no evidence of anyone else. Later, the local sheriff told them the cabin had burned down 15 years earlier. Yet here it stood. The floorboards, the walls, the furniture, all present and untouched, as if waiting for someone to return. The couple left at first light, The forest seemed to breathe as they walked away, soft whispers fading behind them. Neighbors later confirmed the cabin had indeed burned long ago. No one could explain how it still stood, or why it had returned for them. Even years later, one of them reported feeling the same chill on cold nights, as if the cabin remembered their presence. A place paused in time, waiting for someone to arrive. Story 3. The lights over Black Hollow hunters in the backwoods of West Virginia speak of Black Hollow in hushed tones. It's a valley where the fog glows faintly at night, where compasses spin without reason, and lights move as though alive. Those who enter rarely speak of what they saw, and those who do often change forever. Black Hollow is a deep depression between two ridges, dense with pine and hemlock. The air smells metallic, like iron in water, and the undergrowth is thick with moss and wet leaves. Even in summer, fog clings to the valley floor, drifting in soft waves, distorting shapes and shadows. Hunters report a strange quiet, not complete silence, but the usual forest sounds muted, subdued, as if the valley itself absorbs noise. The moonlight barely reaches the ground, and shadows stretch unnaturally across the trails. In early October, a group of hunters entered the hollow for a weekend trip. Their GPS devices began malfunctioning almost immediately. The compasses spun in endless circles. Then the lights appeared. At first, small, flickering orbs floating above the tree line. They moved deliberately, weaving through the fog, climbing the slopes. At times, they seemed to follow the hunters, adjusting their paths to mirror each step. The dogs refused to move forward. They whimpered, hackles raised, ears pinned back. One hunter raised his rifle, but the lights always stayed just out of reach. Even when he fired, the lights moved higher, faster, impossible trajectories. By nightfall, the group realized the lights were forming shapes, elongated, humanoid outlines hovering silently. No sound, no features, just presence. The hunters attempted to leave, but every path seemed to curve back toward the hollow's center, as if the valley itself redirected them. At the peak of night, one hunter caught the lights clearly through binoculars. The shapes were tall, impossibly thin, with glowing points where eyes might have been. They swayed, shifted, and then began moving in unison, like a procession. When the hunters finally broke free and ran toward their campsite, they realized one had vanished. No trace, no sound, nothing in the undergrowth or fog, only the strange lights hovering above, drifting slowly as if waiting. The missing hunter was never found. The others returned to town, shaken, reporting coordinates that made no sense on any map. Locals say the hollow is a place where the forest remembers those who enter. The lights follow, observe, and sometimes take, though no one knows why. Years later, a lone hiker reported seeing the same lights, hovering silently, drifting closer than they should have been able to move. The whisper of wind carried the faintest echo. A name, his own. Would you walk into Black Hollow at night, knowing it might follow you home? Story 4. The Church Beneath the Pines. Not all abandoned places are forgotten. Some wait, preserved by memory and shadow. In the dense forests of North Carolina, a chapel sits hidden beneath a thick pine canopy. No maps, no records. Yet explorers have found it, and those who enter rarely leave unchanged. The chapel is small, stone-built, its roof sagging and covered in moss. Inside, the air smells of mildew, dust, and decayed paper. Hymnals, yellowed with age, lie scattered on the floor, some open, as if recently read. A faint organ hum seems to resonate from nowhere, filling the space with subtle vibration. Outside, the forest presses close, thick pines blocking sunlight. The ground is soft with pine needles muffling footsteps. Everything is still, yet every small sound, a creak, a snap, echoes unnaturally through the empty building. An urban explorer found the chapel in late September. At first, it seemed abandoned, empty, but as he stepped through the door, he noticed carvings in the pews, symbols, letters, shapes not resembling any language he knew. Then came the chanting, soft, rhythmic, almost imperceptible at first. He moved through the nave, pausing at each pew, searching for its source. The chanting grew louder, synchronized with the faint organ hum. It didn't seem human, and yet it followed the cadence of breathing, perfectly timed. The explorer tried to leave. The door resisted, just a few inches of opening, then heavy. He turned, and for a split second, the shadowed interior seemed populated. Figures standing in the corners, perfectly still, watching. At the center of the chapel, the explorer felt a presence close behind. No movement, no touch, just a shift in the air. The organ hum swelled, and the chanting crescendoed into a chorus. Though no one was there, he raised his flashlight. The beam caught the pews. Each carved symbol now glowed faintly, pulsating. The shadowed corners resolved into figures, not moving, not speaking, yet turned directly toward him. He dropped the flashlight. The beam flickered back on. The figures were gone. Every symbol on the pews returned to dull gray. The air still. The chanting vanished. Outside, no trace of movement could be found in the surrounding forest. Yet the explorer would later swear, in recordings and photographs, that he was never truly alone in that chapel. Photographs from the exploration later revealed faint figures in shadow, shapes standing behind him, in pews where no one had been visible. Neighbors and locals had long whispered of the chapel that waits, though few dared approach. Those who did reported similar experiences, subtle vibrations in the air, figures that appeared only when observed indirectly. The explorer returned home, but the hum followed him in dreams, and faint whispers seemed to echo in the quiet corners of his apartment. Some places do not remain contained within their walls. Some leave traces in those who witness them. Would you enter a chapel in the forest, knowing it might still be waiting for you? Story 5. Echoes of the Missing Boy. In the hills of Tennessee, a boy disappeared in 1978. Decades later, hikers report hearing his voice across the same trails, calling, pleading, sometimes laughing. Yet no one is ever there. Some say the forest doesn't forget. Others say it repeats what it wants you to hear. The area around the lake is dense with trees, their roots twisting over wet soil. Night descends early in the valleys, and the water mirrors the sky, reflecting fog that drifts like smoke. The air smells of wet moss and rotting leaves, heavy with the scent of pine. Every sound is amplified. The croak of a frog, the rustle of a branch, the soft lapping of water against the shore. The forest seems alive, listening. Even distant calls of loons echo strangely, carrying in directions that defy logic. Campers, visiting the area decades after the disappearance, heard a voice calling their names. At first they thought it was a prank or another camper, but the voice repeated, sometimes from different directions, closer each time. One night, the campers recorded their experience with a handheld recorder. The audio captured faint syllables, unintelligible yet familiar, repeating their names and snippets of sentences only they would recognize. The voice seemed to circle them, never moving in a straight line, disappearing when they turned. Dogs refused to enter the area near the lake. They whined, sniffed, and backed away, as if sensing something unseen. Footsteps were heard on the soft earth, circling the tents, yet no one was visible. The campers finally left the tents to investigate. In the moonlight, wet footprints formed a circle around the campsite, yet no one was there. The prints were small, childlike, and they ended abruptly, as though the boy had simply vanished. Sound cue, soft water splash, echoing footsteps, faint, high-pitched whistle. The recorder captured a final message, a faint, trembling whisper. "Don't leave me." No one heard the voice in real time, only the recording preserved it. The campers fled, leaving tents and belongings behind, unable to explain the chilling sounds. Years later, other hikers in the same area report hearing the boy again. Sometimes playful, sometimes pleading. Some have captured faint figures near the shore, small, fleeting, gone before focus can settle. Locals say the boy's disappearance left an echo, a presence that repeats over and over across decades. Some call it memory, some call it haunting. Whatever it is, it leaves traces only those who listen carefully can perceive. Would you camp by that lake, knowing someone might still call your name? Story 6. Something in the Coal Road Tunnel. In the abandoned coal roads of Kentucky, tunnels carved through mountains like veins. Workers who explored them decades ago spoke of screams, scratches, and shadows that moved without shape. Some roads are no longer traveled, but their stories remain. One tunnel, in particular, has a history that defies explanation. The tunnel is narrow, lined with blackened stone and old timber supports. Water drips constantly from the ceiling, pooling into small puddles along the floor. The air is cold and smells of damp earth and rust, thick enough to taste. Light barely reaches the far end. Flashlights cast long, trembling shadows. Every sound is amplified. A soft drop of water echoes like a gunshot. The walls seem closer than they are, enclosing anyone who enters in a sense of suffocating stillness. The faint hum of distant machinery, long since abandoned, adds to the unease. A team of workers investigated strange noises reported from the tunnel in late October. At first, it was ordinary, rats, shifting rocks. But then came scratching sounds, deliberate, moving along the walls just beyond the flashlight beams. One worker swore he saw shapes flitting just at the edge of vision, tall, distorted, and impossibly fast. Every time he blinked or looked away, the shapes were gone. The sounds followed them deeper, circling, pausing, returning, like the tunnel itself was alive. They called out, shouting into the darkness. No reply, only the scratching and a faint dragging sound. It wasn't rocks or debris, heavier, intentional, deliberate. At the deepest section of the tunnel, one worker stopped to inspect a puddle. In its reflection, a face appeared, elongated, pale, distorted, eyes unblinking. The face was gone when he lifted his head. Then the lights in the tunnel flickered. Shadows stretched along the walls, converging toward the workers, though no source existed. The team fled, scrambling toward the exit. When they reached daylight, one of the workers was missing. Search parties found nothing inside the tunnel, yet the puddle's reflection had changed. Tiny footprints leading nowhere, toward an impossible wall. The missing worker was never found. Other miners and locals reported strange occurrences. footsteps in empty tunnels, whispers that repeat names, metallic echoes with no origin. Some swear the tunnel remembers those who enter, holding them just out of reach. Even decades later, anyone exploring the old coal roads reports unease, the sensation of being watched, sounds moving independently of the source, and glimpses of shapes at the edge of vision. Some tunnels are not just abandoned, they are waiting. Would you enter a coal road tunnel knowing it might never let you leave? Story 7. The House That Moved in the Appalachian Foothills of Virginia. A surveyor discovered something impossible. A house had shifted 200 feet overnight, its foundation intact, yet the building sat where no one remembered it. The locals call it the house that moves, and those who investigate rarely leave unchanged. The house is modest, 2 stories, with faded white paint and shuttered windows. The surrounding forest presses close, leaving little light at sunrise. Inside, dust blankets furniture and floors, though footprints suggest recent occupancy. The air carries a faint musty scent, mixed with the warmth of an old wood stove long unused. Every creak of the floor echoes unnaturally, and the walls seem to close in slightly as you move through the rooms. Even on calm mornings, shadows stretch at impossible angles, making corners appear deeper, darker, like the house itself has a memory of motion. The surveyor returned multiple times to document the house. Each visit revealed changes. Furniture slightly shifted, objects in different rooms, floors appearing warped, windows would reveal views he didn't remember, a tree where none had stood, a path leading nowhere. On one evening, he discovered an old journal in the attic. Its entries, written decades ago, described the house moving through the night, roads appearing and disappearing, and voices whispering through walls. The handwriting abruptly stopped mid-sentence. It moves again tonight, and I cannot. That night, the surveyor felt the house sway underfoot. Not wind, not quake, but subtle, almost imperceptible. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward him, shifting as he moved. On his final visit, he saw something impossible. Standing at the doorway, he looked down the hallway and saw a version of himself, asleep in a chair, head resting on folded arms. The figure was identical, breathing faintly, yet completely unresponsive to the world around it. When he blinked, the figure was gone. The house had rearranged itself again. The furniture, the doors, even the light filtering through the windows seemed changed, as though time itself had shifted with it. Outside, neighbors could find no trace of recent visitors, and the surveyor's reports were met with skepticism. Yet, photographs showed evidence he could not explain. The surveyor left the region shortly afterward. Years later, the house is reported to appear in different locations, sometimes closer to the forest, sometimes nearer the road, always intact, always slightly altered. Locals warn, do not enter uninvited, do not linger. The house may appear solid and familiar, but it has a memory, a way of replaying, rearranging, and perhaps copying. Some who enter never return as themselves. Would you step inside a house that moves, knowing it might place you somewhere else entirely? Story 8. The Whispering Pass. In the high ridges of the Appalachians, there's a narrow pass locals call the Whispering Pass. 3 hikers entered one autumn night and heard their names carried by the wind. The voices were soft, intimate, impossible to locate, yet unmistakably theirs. The pass is flanked by steep rock faces, covered in moss and thin pine trees. Fog gathers in the low spots, hugging the ground and distorting the moonlight. The air is cold and smells faintly of wet stone and pine sap. Each sound carries farther than expected. The crunch of footsteps, the snap of a twig. Even the wind seems to shift, brushing against the ears like soft fingers. At night, the pass feels alive, aware, as though it listens to anyone who dares to cross. The three hikers noticed it early, whispers in the trees, calling their names. At first, it seemed playful, a trick of the wind. But the whispers persisted, repeating secrets only they could know. Conversations from earlier that day, fears they had never voiced. They tried to leave, retracing their steps, but the pass seemed to twist, paths elongating or curving unnaturally. One hiker's flashlight flickered, and a soft dragging noise brushed past his feet. The whispers became urgent, circling, echoing from every angle. One hiker froze, pointing at a shadow moving in the fog. By the time the others looked, it had vanished. The voices were closer now, behind, above, everywhere. Yet no one was visible. Suddenly, one hiker vanished. The remaining two saw it happen, a figure swallowed by fog, leaving no footprints or trace. The whispers grew louder, almost pleading, almost mocking, repeating the hiker's name. The remaining hikers ran blindly through the pass, feeling eyes on them at every turn. When they finally emerged, one was missing, the other disoriented, speaking only of voices, shapes, and the impossibility of the terrain. The fog dissipated, leaving the pass looking exactly as it had before. Silent, empty, untouched. Years later, new hikers report hearing three voices, calling names in the same pass. Sometimes, they recognize the voices of those who disappeared decades ago. Locals refuse to enter at night, warning that the pass keeps some visitors and returns only what it chooses. The Whispering Pass is a place of memory, of echoes, and perhaps of predation. Some say it responds to fear, drawing out what it senses in those who wander too far. If you hear your name in the wind tonight, will you follow or turn back? 8 stories, 8 accounts from the Appalachian Mountains. Each ridge, each pass, each hollow carries a memory. Some voices return, some never leave. If you've heard your name whispered in these woods, would you answer? If you've made it this far, you've witnessed what most wouldn't dare. Subscribe to Dark Room of Whispers if you can sleep tonight.